It's tempting to put all our energy in protecting the past, whether it's contraception or other issues that have come up, the role of women in society in general. And yes, we do have to put our energy there. But that doesn't mean we stop thinking about the future. And I see this as a key issue, not only for women, not only for moms, but for dads as well, as they are changing their roles. And really, if moms can be in the lead and get a more humane workplace, that'll benefit the whole family, and that will change the value system that we now live under. But I don't want to go further on that because others are going to develop that theme in the panels, in the speeches, and we're very fortunate to have two terrific keynotes and also the panelists both this morning and this afternoon. I discovered Moms Rising, and how many of you have heard of it? I'm just curious. Great. It's if you haven't heard of it before, you're certainly going to hear about it today, and I think you'll consult it in the future. It's a very interesting phenomenon that what can be done by an internet site. And of course, all of you have heard of moveon.org. And Joan Blades, whose residence is in California and who arrived at 1 o'clock this morning on her plane. Fortunately, she was not intercepted by Air Force One, but we're very glad that you could come, Joan. What Moms Rising has done, which is sort of the heart of the political process, it tells women's stories in a very real way. And on the website, testifying before committees, and these stories are a prelude to political action. We're so used to thinking, well, it's only the fat cat lobbyists, which unfortunately it often is. But the only way to get on an even platform with them is for women to speak up and tell their stories. So when I sent Joan the galley of my book a couple of months ago, she kindly agreed to write a blurb, and she said I was singing their song. And I should say, you're singing my song. So we're going to sing together this afternoon. But they hit the hot button issues. How can we change the workplace so that families, not just women, families can do the two important tasks of their lives: be good caregivers for their children, be good employees in their workplace, and not feel constantly torn between the two in a kind of dramatic and wrenching way. And we know it's possible. And we know that certain changes will make the difference. So once again, Joan, thank you so much for coming to Vermont. We're delighted you're here.
And I'm delighted to be here. And thank you for having me. It's really wonderful.
Thank you. Well, let me just start out. You told me an interesting story. She's also the co-founder of MoveOn, which just about everybody knows, at least in Vermont.
Thank you.
You told me an interesting story about how MoveOn was started. You want to tell our audience?
MoveOn was actually started way back in '98, midway in the Clinton impeachment scandal. And my husband and I sent out a one-sentence petition to under 100 of our friends and family. Congress must immediately censure the president and move on to pressing issues facing the nation. I'm actually a mediator by training and inclination, and that was a statement that you could love Clinton or hate him, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green Party. We had people signing this statement. And we had 100,000 people sign it in the first week, which was absolutely extraordinary in '98. And that's how I got into organizing, and I had no plans to be doing this. So it's very strange, the things that do happen. And I actually didn't have plans to start Moms Rising either.
How did that happen?
Well, these things just happen to me sometimes. I was reading I wrote a book called The Motherhood Manifesto together. We wrote a book. We also did a DVD and whoever is willing to have a house party, I will give this DVD to at the end of this. And then you can share it with people. Called The Motherhood Manifesto, after reading in her manuscript, because I do get manuscripts sometimes, that in fact there's not a huge wage gap between men and women, there's a huge wage gap between men and mothers. And it so happens that if you're a woman without children, you'll maybe make about 10% less, but if you're a mother, you'll make about 27% less, and if you're a single mom, you'll make about 40% less. Well, gee, why are there so many women and children in poverty? And I might also add to that, why are there so few women in leadership? And when I say few women in leadership, there are 12 women CEOs in the Fortune 500 right now. Of the last 6 Supreme Court justice nominees, 3 men, 3 women, all the men had children, and none of the women did. This is not an accident. We have 80% of women become mothers by the time they're 40-something. So we have this profound bias against women in the workplace, in hiring, wages, and advancement. And it's a huge problem. I grew up, and my mother and my friends' moms were housewives, and I looked around me and I kind of went, secretary, teacher, or nurse, this is not looking good. And then the women's movement was, yes, feminism was great. And it really wasn't until I read Kristen's manuscript, The F Word, Feminism in Jeopardy. And I did want to know, why is that? What's going on here? And I got to that point. I went, oh, this is a serious problem. So that's what inspired me to write The Motherhood Manifesto with Kristen, who so kindly agreed to. That is the greatest accident in the world. Kristen is a fabulous writer. I asked her if I wrote a 2-page Motherhood Manifesto to start with, because prior to Move On, I started a business called Berkeley Systems. If anyone here is familiar with flying toasters, that was probably its best known product. What can I say? Or You Don't Know Jack. That was the other game show. Very different things I've done along the way here. But in running that company, I had the experience of starting as my husband's partner, having our child, and reporting to him later on, which, it didn't sit really well. What can I say? But so it's a question that has real personal meaning for me.
Well, I think everybody probably has a story to tell about that. But, you mentioned the book, The F Word, which those of you who are not familiar with stands for feminism, just so we keep this not ladylike, but we're beyond ladylike, but civil. Feminism still is a hot word. And I sort of argued with my publisher whether the title of my book should be The New Feminist Agenda. I said, it's going to turn some people off. Why can't we just call it Family and Work? And she insisted, so we'll know in a couple of months whether she's right or I was right. But it's too bad in a way. One of the questions is, can we sort of make feminism less scary, less toxic, or should we really invent a new language? Just go back to the more milquetoast kind of language of gender equality, which is how I have always defined feminism. Or can we inspire this next generation to recapture it? Maybe Sandra Fluke will help us do that, because I see a lot of activism at UVM in reaction to Rush Limbaugh and that very bad outburst, which I gather is not atypical, but certainly shocking for us.
Yeah.
So do you think there's a new generation might either redefine it or get upset enough to get on board and speak out like she did?
You know, the interesting thing is, I've been told that if you go into a classroom now and you ask college women if they're feminists, most of them will not raise their hand. The majority of the class will not. But when you talk about it being about equal ability to compete in the workplace and equal rights, everyone will raise their hand. So I would like feminism to be, restored as a word that people want to call themselves. But what do I care about the most? I care about the fact that people think we need the equal ability to succeed. We started Moms Rising in 2006. We're having lots of fun working on the policy part, because the Motherhood Manifesto was a whole set of what it takes for us not to have a profound bias against mothers in the workplace. And yeah, I brought this along because it's one of my favorite show and tell pieces. It's our Motherhood Agenda. And it's hard to remember it all, so we have used the word mother. Everything that makes for outstanding, flexible workplaces is good for everybody.
Yeah, I'm both optimistic and pessimistic about the private sector, because whenever you try to propose a new law, even the existing Family and Medical Leave Act, which is unpaid family leave for the first 3 months and only for employers that employ more than 50 people, business was horrified. And to get paid family leave or paid sick days, the business community is very much opposed. Because they see it, instead of the way we see it, that it improves the bottom line, they see it as hurting the bottom line and job killer.
Well, the nice thing about that is I come from California. Now, some of you may not know that out of over 177 countries worldwide, there are 3 that have no paid leave for new mothers. That's Papua New Guinea, Swaziland, and the United States of America. Now, if you know Sesame Street, one of those countries is not like the other. You really got to ask how in the world we have women in this country giving birth and days later going to work because they're going, should I feed my family this week or take care of my new baby? It's not a question women should be asking, but they are. And I'm very proud to say that in 2004, California passed paid family leave, and it doesn't cost the businesses anything. It's like the disability insurance programs that run, and it's by employees that it's paid for. And there was a study done just in 2010 that basically shows it was a non-event for businesses. It didn't hurt businesses, and when you ask them about it, basically it's been good for them. It allows for more continuity of the workforce, less turnover, happier workers. It's a good thing. So we have, and Moms Rising has been working on this issue, and I'm very pleased to say we were successful in helping it pass with policy partners in New Jersey and helping it pass in Washington State, though it's not funded yet in Washington State. So, we only have 47 more states to go, right?
But when I looked up that study, and you point out, that it is working, and correct me if it's changed since I read this, that not many people use it. It hasn't had as high a usage as expected. And I interpret that, and I'd like to hear your point of view, that the culture still says you don't take that leave. Even if it's legal, you may lose your job, you may not get a promotion, and so people hesitate, that the culture still says, hey, if you take leave for a new baby, either a man or a woman, means you're not a serious worker.
Well, I think it depends on which workspace you're talking about. If you're if you're part of the managerial professional classes, that may be the case. Though I've got to say that for a lot of women, taking time off is necessary. But if you're in the, really the working class that is struggling with multiple jobs too often, or, you don't have much choice. It's about informing people. We've been working hard to inform people that it is available to them. I think that's probably as much the problem.
Getting the word out.
Getting the word out, because people don't expect it in this country.
Yes, it's amazing, isn't it? I mean, I have a cousin who's doing work in Saudi Arabia, and in Saudi Arabia you can get arrested for driving a car. But if you can get someone to drive you to work, you get paid maternity leave in Saudi Arabia. So it just shows you the incredible mindset. That's what we got to change. And we also, I think, have to inspire women and men to say, this is something worth fighting for. Because, the conservative movement and the progressive movement really have one thing in common on this issue. They both say mothers should be home with their children. And what the progressive movement is saying, mothers should be home with their babies for the first 3 or 6 months or a year. And that's right. It is good for babies. It is good for mothers to have that bonding experience. But how are you going to do it if you lose your job or if you can't pay the rent? So the idea that mothers should go back to, or that feminism is destroying the family because we're enabling women to go to work is so contradictory in terms of you got to make it possible for mothers to stay home with their families, at least for that critical early childhood period. Do you see it that way?
Yeah. Well, most families require 2 working parents now. So in this country, the birth of a child was one of the top causes of a poverty spell. Yeah, the middle class used to be far more secure than it is today. What, poverty spell? That's a terminology that I'd never heard 20 years ago. Yet it's become a really common thing as our safety net has been shredded. And it's been, shredded by a whole combination of things, which is why, now you were saying about Moms Rising having the stories to bring, though there's a profound bias against mothers in hiring and wages and advancements, there's actually a bias for us with our elected representatives and with the media. So, when Moms Rising shows up with a book of stories by our moms at the White House, and we did have Moms Rising members at the White House last week with this book. That's why I had this. We have done this on paid sick days. We have done this on, we got healthcare, paid sick days. Flexibility. You got the whole list again. Toxics, clean air. So this is help keep America moving forward on healthcare. These are the stories of parents whose kids couldn't get coverage. And now they can because of the ACA, which is really,
you have to say the ACA is Obamacare.
Yes, it's been called.
Our side uses ACA, but
Obamacare, the health care reform, call it what you will. You have all sorts of families that had kids that were born with an illness or had an illness, and then they can't get health care coverage, or they're about to reach their cap, or they're not going to be able to go to school because, they've gotten past 18 and can no longer be on their... Now kids can be on till the age of 26. It's hugely important to those people that have medical issues. And when the mothers show up with these stories, it's powerful, and it gives leaders something really tangible to talk about. When you talk about online organizing, one of the funny things is people think it's all online. It's like saying when we used the telephone to call each other up, it was telephone organizing. Well, it was telephone organizing, but you also do a whole lot of other things at the same time.
I've just thought of this as you're talking. Move On was created in a tough time, political time, when President Clinton was being indicted. But movement was formed saying, don't stop, pay attention to the rest of the issues that confront us. In a way, we're in such a time, not with the president being indicted, but with the political system in a way being indicted. And the same message really applies. We got to focus on what we can do with the major issues of our time, even though the Congress does not appear to be addressing them. So it is really a good time for activism. And I think the hardest thing is to make people feel optimistic enough that if they take to the streets, if they go to Washington, if they write their letters, if they organize, that nobody's going to listen.
Well, what FDR said was, you convinced me. Now, make me do it. And that, the fact is, all of our elected leaders cannot be effective without us behind them, if not pushing them, at least supporting them. And the pushing's probably a really good idea, to be honest. So the more we can do that, the better it is for them. It's what they want. The beauty of online organizing is it's not broadcast. It's us listening to our members and hearing what's most essential for them and then trying to find out ways to help them be more effective.
Could you? Yeah. I mean, we really have to send that message out, and you're helping to do it. One of the issues that I hear the most about, which is not that hard to do, is workplace flexibility. I mean, so many mothers, so many people who have an aged parent at home or a sick child, instead of being forced to say, do I stay home or do I keep my job, a lot of women and a lot of men would maybe like to go to a 4-day week, a 3-day week, or be home by 3 o'clock to meet the school bus. And you're familiar with this law. We always think of the Scandinavian countries as being the only countries that are really out front on these issues, and they are. I asked somebody, how are you going to deal with this issue? And they said, become Scandinavian. But that's the ideal. But it's other countries, England, which, especially under David Cameron, can be accused of being a socialist country, and Australia, which is a very macho country, both have enacted a law, and I'm sure you know, the right to request flexibility. It's pretty simple. It says you as an employee have the right to request a change in your schedule. Doesn't mean your boss has to give it to you, but if he or she objects, they have to put it in writing. And if you can't negotiate, there's a tribunal that settles the matter. It was very controversial at first. Businesses hated it. Now, from the information I get, they really kind of like it because they keep their good employees. Somebody who may want to work flexible hours right after baby, when the child enters school, is going to be your most valuable employee, full-time employee once again. So I think that's something, some people have flexibility now. They work for companies that will accommodate that. They're secure enough in their jobs that they can take the risk. But a lot of low-wage and even moderate-wage employees are scared to even ask because, especially in a tight economy, there's a good chance they'll say, yeah, I'll give you flexibility, you're fired. And that is often the outcome. So it's something that could be done in the private sector, but probably should become a way of life and law. How do we get to accepting flexibility, which would be good for the elderly too, who want to work maybe 3 days a week?
I mean, the whole reason I wrote this book is this is not to be a political appeal. This is full-on business appeal. And if you take a look through your black folder, there's a custom-fit workplace proposal, which is fundamentally, after this came out in 2010, and you always dream, book's going to come out, everybody takes it, and everything changes, and it almost never happens like that. And then you go to the organizing phase. And what I've come to understand in the year and a half since the book came out is that we need champions. We need champions in academia. Every business school in this country should be teaching flexibility, telework, high commitment work practices, nonlinear career paths. Yeah, we have University of California, Marianne Mason, notes that more women graduating with PhDs for over a decade and more men on the tenure track still. What might be going on? Correlated with babies. Well, UC Berkeley changed their tenure track. It now can be 8 years or 9 years. It's equitable. Men can do it. Women can do it. Some people have health issues or their parents can. It doesn't have to be babies. It's a more humane practice. We're stuck in this historical construct that's unnecessary. And in fact, that change at UC Berkeley caused changes to start happening in university systems all around the country. I was told it hasn't happened here at Burlington yet. Sorry. Sometimes you get to workplaces where the people without kids resent the people with kids because the people with kids have special perks. That's not creating the right workplace culture. These practices are good for everybody.
The university has flexibility for faculty, and most faculty can figure it out, but not for staff. And that's not right. Paid sick days is related to this as well. Now, the state of Connecticut, and I'm sure you followed this, the governor ran on a platform of paid sick days, and they had to compromise, but Connecticut, I believe, is the first state that provides paid sick days for service workers. And when the governor was polled in terms of his popularity, he had to raise taxes, he had to do a lot of unpopular things. But when people asked, how do you like the paid sick days, just for service workers, its campaign theme was, would you want somebody to sneeze into your salad? Which I think was pretty effective. So can we make progress on paid, which labor unions love?
Paid sick days is another of those. It's not as severe as the paid maternity leave, but out of these 177, 160 have paid sick days. The industrialized countries, the ones that consider themselves first world, they have paid sick days. And yes, the people least likely to have it are the people working in food service and, at the low-wage jobs. So we talk about Moms Rising actions. I'm forgetting where it was. We delivered burrito-grams one time because there was a whole outbreak that happened because someone making burritos was sick, and I should remember which state that was in. But
New Mexico.
Thank you. We like to, take advantage of moments, teachable moments, I think is the word for it.
No parent has been without the experience of waking up and the child has a fever, and what do? Do you send her or him off to daycare? Do you stay home? So, it's just such a fundamental issue.
We literally do have kindergartners staying home alone. And if you know kindergartners, they still believe in fairies and leprechauns and people like that. These people should not be home alone. And it's not that they're not good parents, it's just the decisions that the parents are being asked to make are not fair. We're not giving the support they need.
Well, the other issue we both have emphasized, I did in my book, and you in Moms Rising, is early childhood education and access to investment in early childhood education. I'll make a confession, or you might see it as bragging, but I did ask Barack Obama a question yesterday, and it was about all the issues we're talking about. What is the administration doing? And one of the things he replied was, we are trying to improve the quality of early childhood education and access to early childhood education. And, it's all connected, because not only do you need affordable, quality childcare in order to be able to go to work and feel good about it, But those early years, we now know, from 0 to 5, and there may be some education people in the audience, are so critical to brain development, to everything that they're going to do in their future.
One of my very favorite programs, in fact, in here, this book is, all things that are for everybody, but the one that is a little mom-focused is Babies at Work program. There are over 140 successful formal Babies at Work programs in the country now, which isn't a not. This is one of the newest things. But when I had Berkeley Systems, when we were a startup, we had Babies at Work because, that was all you could do. Others have been taking babies to work for the, millennia.
Right.
And then something happened where babies weren't allowed in the workplace. And then
dogs sometimes are.
Well, they are. Well, we had dogs and babies at one point. I still remember there was a woman in the accounting department who had a baby, and she stayed home for 3 months. But then she came back, and she cried when she came back, because 3 months is not actually very old. And if I'd known what I know now, I'd have been able to go to the management team and said, here's the official Babies at Work program that lays out how a parent can take care of their baby and work till 6 months of crawling. It's not good if you're a firewoman, but but if you're in an office job, or even some bookstores allow this, having a baby at work is actually community building. And it's a lovely thing, and in some cases you get 80% time, because yes, babies do take some time, but really small babies, you can do this. And then I've been working from home for over a decade now, and it's incredibly effective. You may not know it, but JetBlue, all their booking agents are in a certain part of Utah, and they work from their homes. And the telework opportunity is one of the places where we actually have onshoring happening, because the cost of labor overseas has been going up about 10 to 15% a year, and the cost of putting a telework arrangement together in people's homes has become very affordable. So you have people that are happy at work. They can schedule it to fit their needs, because that's the place where we now have the capacity for low-wage jobs to be scheduled in a way that's compatible with people's lives. And when that happens, you actually make them dramatically better. You reduce turnover, and it's a win for everybody.
Right.
So but this opportunity
is also good for the environment, because less commuting time.
We could save 43 million metric tons of carbon a year. That's not even talking about the other pollutants. If the estimated 40% of potential teleworking workers that wanted to, and that's 79% of that 40%, did so half-time, that's a lot.
Even though my book, it's called The New Feminist Agenda, I devote a big chapter to coalition building. This cannot be a women's issue alone. You think of the elderly. They can get on board. If AARP mobilized for real family work issues, a lot of older people would like to continue working in this economy, but they might want to work 3 days a week or 2 days a week. The disabilities community would often like part-time work. Labor, which is not strong at the present time, but labor has to be on board on this issue as well in designing labor contracts that allow for this kind of flexibility. So, most things get accomplished by coalitions. It's not just one group. And I learned this in my legislative experience. You just can't do it by yourself. And at the risk of a little diversion, when the bottle ban was first passed in Vermont, you know who the environmentalists found as their most potent partners? It wasn't labor, it was agriculture. It was farmers who were sick of having their cows choke on glass and plastic. So you had this unusual coalition. So I think, we have to find a way to reach out.
you look at all these programs, all these opportunities to make work better. They've been around for a long time now. There's studies to show that they're better for business and better for individuals. And yet, the change, by and large, has not happened. They're the exceptions, not the rule. And we need to hit a tipping point to a new normal. And the reason I'm optimistic is because we're also dealing with some disruptive technologies. Because by and large, businesses don't change except when there's a crisis, is what I've come to understand. And when you've got an extraordinary leader. But when that leader goes away, very often they'll shift back. And we're talking about traditional businesses tend to have a command and control authoritarian work structure. And really the most productive, highly motivated workforces are much more, self-actualized. People have shared ownership. There's a lot of mutual respect and empowerment of all employees. And that certainly sounds optimal, but people kind of go back to that kind of more tight place when they're... But because of telework, you have things changing, and you have cities like Atlanta and Houston and, and even the federal government encouraging telework. So if you look at the game board, they're all these different places that are pointed in the same direction. So I think there's kind of a strategy option here. And you talk about coalitions, what really brings this up. When you have government and you have business and you have academics, and we need Hollywood too, portraying
that would be great.
The right, work models that really look dynamic and attractive. And the consultants, and you get them all pointed the same direction at the same time. I like to believe that it would be possible for us to have a new normal.
Has Moms Rising ever thought of making a film or making a...
I have my documentary.
Yeah. Okay.
And I actually...
we need Madonna to get into this issue.
I agree with you. And if you can introduce me, or anyone here can introduce me to Madonna, I'm on it.
The real challenge would be Lady Gaga, but we won't. But who knows what she really thinks deep down?
And for that matter, we want some guys doing this too. When you say work-life balance, typically the crowd is 90-something% female. And I'm really glad to see you guys here. But the fact is, that's what you end up. And if we're in the pink ghetto, I'm sorry, how many women CEOs did I say there were? 12? You need the CEOs on board too, or else these work change things don't happen.
The toughest thing in order to get continuity, as you said, one good employer, life is great, you get a new boss, life is miserable. We need to get a cultural change where this is the accepted way of doing business. And that's what these other countries have done. I mean, if Saudi Arabia feels under pressure, where women have zilch rights, we got to stop and think. Progress does occur. I'm a great believer in progress, but it doesn't occur in a straight line. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. So we're in a definitely down period, but I think that will ignite the up period. And I think one of the most important things we have to do is try to keep our optimism. There's a saying that pessimists are usually right. We can all tell each other these stories, but optimists change the world. And that's what we have to hold on to. I mean, that's the basis of your work, right? I mean, you believe that we can create a different culture and a different set of policies.
And I believe that really citizen action is the most important action of all. And both Move On and Moms Rising are, benefiting from the wisdom of our membership. It's not about us saying, hey, we're doing this now. It's about going, okay. Yeah, sounds good. And then trying to come up with the strategies for going in that direction. Because anything we do that isn't inspired by and pushed by our members, it's just going to fall flat.
we need more women in public life and public office. I mean, it's so glaring. I mean, the reason Sandra Fluke got upset was because this panel of men was deciding about contraception. And I have to tell you, before I was in politics, I testified for the Equal Rights Amendment in Vermont in the early 70s, and the Judiciary Committee in the House was all male. And, you know, it's sort of humbling when you have to hold out a tin cup and say, please help me. And it was one of the sparks that was lit that said, hey, I want to be at that table. Until we're at those tables and in those rooms in record numbers, we're not going to get dramatic change. 17 women in the United States Senate. What if there were 50? Would we be having this debate? We would be having it very differently. And you don't need every woman to be pro-choice or to support access to contraception. If you had 50 women and 50 men, this is the hypothetical I have in my earlier book, Pearls, Politics, and Power. Just do the math with me for a moment. 50 women, 50 men. Okay, Sarah Palin's in the Senate and Michelle Bachmann. It's the first time I've told this story this way. So some of the women are not going to support these issues. Let's say out of the 50 women, 20 dissent. So you have 30 women. The 50 men, some of them may not support it, but 30 of them will. So you got 30 women, 30 men, you got 60 votes, enough to stop a filibuster, enough to pass paid family leave, workplace flexibility. So, sometimes we think women can only make a difference if we all think alike. Of course we don't all think alike. Do all men think alike? Maybe on a few subjects, but but not by and large. So to be at the table is critical. But one of the things that still makes it hard for women are these family work issues too, because lots of political jobs are 24/7. They're very demanding. And one of the reasons I decided to hold this conference is because when I was speaking about women running for office, about my earlier book, I'd often get asked a question, well, how did you do it? I have 4 children. I won't give the long answer to that, because there's not a simple answer. It's still a very personal question. But the bottom line is the society has to be more supportive. Now, some countries have very supportive maternity leave for another reason, not because they're feminists, but because they want to increase the population. You have France and Germany competing with each other as a remnant of World War II, where they lost so much of their population, and they want to encourage population growth. Now, in the United States, we have one of the higher birth rates, but we also have the highest child poverty rate of all developed countries. That is sobering. And why do we have that rate? The biggest anti-poverty program is parents who bring income, who can work. And when a woman has to quit her job, she, especially a single parent, almost always dooms those kids to poverty. So it's not just a feminist, it's a huge economic issue. It's a huge justice issue. But we got to be there in order to make it different. Thank you so much for coming. And let me announce what's next.